But guys, I think the biggest topic, if we're going at least into this show, around baseball, around kind of sports world in this case, is the situation that happened with Jorge Lopez on the New York Mets. And for those Oriole fans that remember Jorge Lopez, he was one of the fan favorites. You know, he reinvented himself in Baltimore, went from a starter to a reliever, and then became an all-star for the Baltimore Orioles, then was traded away. And he had a little bit of time with the team last year. But look, we're not sugarcoating this. The Mets season right now, it's a disaster in New York. But for Jorge Lopez, he was under a lot of fire because of the incident on the field. And I think we have a video of the incident on the field of him losing his composure. So if we're looking at this right now, it was a check swing call that Jorge Lopez wasn't happy with. That was the previous at bat by Ohtani. But Jorge Lopez was not happy with the check swing call, gets in an argument, and he's tossed from the game. But see, that's not the part where everyone's, reacting to. It's this next part where he's walking off the field. The manager's then going to go back and check out what's going on or go to the mound. And while Lopez is walking off the field, he chucks his glove into the stands and walks off. That is the part where it started the whole issue here with Jorge Lopez. And you can tell there's a lot of frustration. And when you're losing games, it's magnified, right? And the Mets are a disaster. Their payroll is extremely high. They're not meeting any expectations over the last 2 years. And clearly there's a lot of frustration. And then where a lot of controversy then happened was the post-game remarks, which we're going to dive into how strong media can be when they're trying to quote someone. And I want you guys to keep this in mind before we play it. Jorge Lopez's first language is not English. Mm-hmm. So when this was reported and tweeted out last night, we'll let you guys listen to it, and we will give you the answer of what was actually said after the video.
Carlos Mendoza said that he understands the emotion, but that particular action of throwing your glove into the stands was unacceptable. Looking back on it, do you regret doing that?
No, I don't regret it. I think I've been looking the worst teammate probably in the whole MLB. So, whatever happened. So, whatever they want to do it, I'll be tomorrow here if they want me. Whatever they want to do. So, I'm gonna keep doing this thing. So I'm healthy on whatever. On whatever to do. I'm ready to come back tomorrow. If they want me to be here, so I'll be here.
So here's the thing. What was at least talked about, because we talked about this a little bit on the live stream last night. And I even said, because the quotes that were coming out, I had a chance to watch it, was that he was saying that he was on the worst fucking team. Yeah. And that then it was commenting on like the worst teammates and worst team. Mm-hmm. Right. That was the conversation. And I initially said, if that's what he said, that's a bigger problem with the guys in the locker room, right? Because that feels like you're attacking the team and it's a me issue, not a we. But when you sit there and listen more to it and you understand, we even talked about it too. Jorge Lopez is such a great guy. He has a lot of things going on personally. For those that didn't follow the journey here with his own family and his child, there's a lot of uncertainty there with trying with health concerns, transplant concerns that in this case right now, and this is from, I believe, with
this is talking about Boomer.
This is Boomer Esiason's comments, because Boomer went after Jorge in the morning this morning when we're recording this. And according to Boomer, Jorge Lopez has bigger things than baseball on his mind. His son is ill and waiting for a transplant. These players are human and have problems, but we assume their life is perfect. Life got to him last night. He's human. So a couple things. First off, shows you there is more going on in someone's life than you want to know. And you want to try to be able to keep your business and your professional life separate, but that's the human element where it's hard to do that when things are very, very stressful and frustrating. But this is what we said last night, right? Like, because we didn't have all the answers. But one thing we did say with Jorge is he's a good guy. One moment should not define him. Now, let's talk about what did happen, because I think I agree. He came out and said this morning, it blew up and saying, I was just trying to say I am the worst teammate. I am the actual worst teammate in Major League Baseball, and you guys blew this out of proportion. The one thing you can't deny, throwing the glove over the screen and the outburst was a problem. Like that to me is when you're looking at your job and what's happening. Teams have certain standards, and you can say whether it was right, it was justified to DFA him. That's up to you. But teams have standards and regulations where he was either going to be fined, suspended, or in this case, he was designated for assignment. But guys, I mean, I don't know who wants to go next. I mean, Brad, since you're up on the screen here, first off, we got to be careful before we talk on things, but it's a two-sided sword here where there's much more to the story, but two, there is consequences for the actions that happened on the field. I don't care about the necessary comments that happened in the clubhouse.
Yeah, I think, my initial knee-jerk reaction to this was kind of like, it's reminded me of, and this by no means me comparing Jorge Lopez, the person, to Trevor Bauer, the person, just the event. But when Trevor Bauer chucked the ball, over the fence, that moment kind of reminded me of that moment. And that, like, you're forever changed, your perception is forever changed of that player. And so, unfortunately, I think that this is kind of going to follow Jorge Lopez wherever he goes, in the same fashion of like Trevor Bauer chucking that ball over the fence. I think that's probably going to happen regardless of what's going on in his personal life. And I feel for him. I mean, it sucks to hear that, his child's waiting on a transplant. And I can't imagine what the distractions that can cause and what that can do to a person, especially with their emotions in a high stress environment, like, a professional baseball game. But at the same time, like you were saying, Ryan, from a professional standpoint, I think this is unfortunately going to follow him for a very long time.
Yeah, I think, well, here's the thing too. I will say that image of him throwing the glove is going to stay there. And also, I think what we're learning with the media standpoint is that, especially in New York, things are magnified. Like people say, it's bigger in New York. Well, no, it is. The storylines, the Mets are getting talked about so much because they play in New York. They're not a good team. They're not reaching expectations. They are paying a boatload of money for their payroll to just be one of the worst teams in all of baseball right now. So that's number one. And number two, because they're on a bigger market, you're going to see that get pushed out. And for Jorge Lopez, I think I think a lot's happened in the last 24 hours. I think it's fair to say, I think that Jorge's going to get another chance somewhere. I think a lot of teams, he's had a good year so far overall. And quite frankly, I think that teams are going to look at it more of being like, there was a lot of misunderstanding, but unfortunately, this whole thing could have been prevented, Zach.
Yeah, it sucks. And something we talked about last night, and you see so many reporters and specifically Baltimore reporters talking about today, is this is not the Jorge Lopez we know. Jorge was loved by teammates, loved by media. He was anyone you ask, he was the nicest guy in the Orioles clubhouse. And that's why last year, when he was DFA'd late in the year and he had an opportunity to come back to Baltimore, even though he wasn't eligible for the playoff roster, the Orioles were like, yeah, we'll take Jorge Lopez. He's a fan favorite. He's a clubhouse favorite. So it was just, in my mind, it was just one of those things where what people are saying, life got to him last night. The Mets are 10-25 in their last 35. He's dealing with stuff off the field, and then it just feels like, at times you can't do anything right, and you just saw the emotion. And Trevor May tweeted this out earlier today, talking about Jorge Lopez and the interview, and he was like, I recognize the look on his face. He's like, it's a tough spot to be as an athlete because you feel like everything's going wrong. And, you're just in that spot, that dark space. And like you said, Ryan, the glove throwing is one thing that will be remembered. It's hopefully as time goes on, we get away from this narrative that he was calling out his teammates, because I truly believe that's not, one, what he was doing or his intentions, and two, that's not who he is.
Yeah, and that was the thing last night when we talked about it. And again, this is a great message for everyone, and it's even for myself. Like, hey, if you're not 100% sure, we haven't seen it, we don't want to jump to conclusions, right? But it is the case. If you do attack a team in that locker room, like a player goes after and says things, yeah, that you should be reprimanded and you're not going to fit in there. But that wasn't the case because we know Jorge Lopez. Like, the pieces didn't make sense to the puzzle.
Yeah,
is what we're getting at here. And for Kevin, at least on a as I move the next question, at least I'll say to you, and then after your thought, we'll move on. Is that with Jorge, baseball is supposed to be it's a job, but it's also a place, if things are going on outside of the field, your personal life, it's supposed to be your escape. But when you're the team, everything's going wrong, and the environment, I don't know the Mets environment, but it doesn't feel very stable. It feels more toxic than anything because it just feels like nothing's going right. Maybe him also now getting out of New York could be the best thing for him. And Kevin, I think there's going to be a lot of teams that could really use him right now.
Yeah, there will be. We've talked about it. Jorge Lopez was not pitching badly from a baseball perspective. I think his ERA is hovering right around 3.5 right now. So those are fine numbers. Jorge Lopez, he's a good person who had a bad moment. And there was a lot that contributed to it. I mean, Ryan, Zach, Brad, you guys all talked about it. But we all have bad moments, right? We all have those moments of weakness or whatever you want to call them. And we know with Jorge, him with his son, with his family, and how trying and taxing that has been. You mentioned it there, Ryan, where him being in New York, everything is magnified. I think that is the hardest market to be in when you're talking about media pressure, expectations, when there even are no expectations. I know the Mets have the payroll and there were this season, and I think that has magnified it too. But when a team is losing and there's a bunch of pressure from everywhere, sometimes it comes to a head, comes to a boiling point. And I think everybody's been there in some way, shape, or form. There was a lot of confusion last night, I think, with what Jorge Lopez actually said. And I think there was even, a bunch of, he definitively said this or he definitively said that. And we really didn't know. And I know that, there were clarifying questions and whatnot. But to me, even though he's, not going to be in New York anymore, I think he will latch on. But Ryan, you made a point about how it's probably, and Brad too, you mentioned how it's probably going to follow him for a long time. The image of the glove being thrown, him talking about the team and teammates and whatnot. I think when people see Jorge Lopez for a little bit, they're going to remember him for that, which I don't think is particularly fair based off of his track record. I mean, we saw a bunch of people. I mean, Melanie Newman last night put out, singing his praises about how good of a person he is. And that's not the Jorge Lopez that Baltimore or anybody's been, dealing with. This is a good person. But it was just a moment of weakness, I think, and that's okay.
Yeah, the job, and again, the job of what happens on the job shouldn't define you as a person. You got to look at the body of work. Jorge's body of work and the people around him, that's who he is. And I think, Brad, final point here, we're talking about the translator situation.
Yeah, I saw somebody in the comments. I think it was, I just lost it, but it was Justin Berlin was saying something about how the club didn't provide him with the translator. But I thought it was interesting that when we talked about this off camera, that you had some insight on the translator conversation, and just kind of wanted you to clarify that for some of the fans who might not know.
Yeah, so I'll do it real quickly. It's they would like you to speak with a translator. It's not that you have to, right? Because you see a lot of players now, especially Latin players, that can speak English, and so they want to be able to do it, and they feel like they can do it on their own. Jorge Lopez, I think, is one of those guys that feels he can speak English, but that's not his first language, obviously. So he's going to have situations where it comes up. But I think that's something where in certain cases, that's why for the Orioles, we talked about it. That's why Santander always has a translator. That's why, even like the Otani having a translator. Well, that's a different situation.
That's a different translator story.
That's a different translator. But the point is they have them there because it's a security to just make sure none of this happens. So it's not a mandatory thing that they have to be there, but it's something I guarantee you moving forward, that's going to be talked about, that they're going to say, hey, we want a guy there no matter what when you're talking with a translator, because we don't want to have another story. And I know they say, all press is good press. This isn't good press for anybody. It's not good press for Jorge Lopez. It's not good press for the New York Mets. And right now, and honestly, it even negatively impacts the Mets more of saying, like, things aren't together. And I think that is fair to say. This Mets team has probably been the most disappointing. You can argue they are the most disappointing team over the last two seasons.
Without